Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. This episode is all about soup. I am recording this in November when it is 100% soup season. It's starting to get colder out. So comforting to have a warm bowl of soup with your meal or as your meal. And there are a lot of misconceptions, concerns, questions regards to what do I look for when I'm selecting a soup, or if I'm making it from home, how can I make it in a healthier way? So I'm going to answer all of those questions today. I'm going to talk about, should you fear the calories, that you're drinking your calories in soup? Someone had mentioned that in the Facebook group that I provide, which, by the way, if you're not part of the Healthy Lifestyle Support Group on Facebook, the link is in the show notes. Definitely join that. I just recorded a live about this topic there, and I think it's super important for you to be able to have a dialogue and understanding and communicate with other people who are on a similar path and journey than you. So I appreciate you listening to this podcast. It's awesome that you're here, but definitely being a part of a group and having kind of keeping things top of mind in that Healthy Lifestyle Support Group on Facebook. It's completely free to you. I think will only add more benefit to your life. So one person had commented and questioned kind of like this fear of drinking her calories from soup, but she loves soup, all soups, clear broth soups, cream soups, all that stuff. And we're going to talk today about, is cream soup healthy? Is clear broth soup healthy? And like what makes it healthy and all of those things. So that was one question that came up. Somebody else had a question about, if I'm looking at sodium, what are kind of the guidelines, like how much is too much, that sort of a thing. So that is what I'm going to address today, in addition to maybe some other tips about bone broth and all of those things. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you're new to the podcast, I just want to say welcome, and here we go. So, when it comes to drinking your calories from soup, should you be fearful of it? If you've listened to the podcast before, then you know my answer is going to be no. We do not fear foods at all, ever, never. At the same time, we want to definitely take a look at the quality of the soup, how it's being prepared, what's going in, and all those things. So one thing I think is really important is that very often I hear this too, like I'm afraid of having nuts, they're so high in calories. Well, nuts, although they might be calorically dense, they're very filling, they're very satiating, and they're very nutritious. So yeah, it might be for a quarter cup of almonds, say like 200 calories or so, but those 200 calories are probably going to prevent you from overeating later at your dinner. And so I'm saying that because when it comes to soup, there are a number of different studies that actually show that someone who has a bowl or a cup of soup before a meal actually tends to reduce their calories of that meal by 20%. So if you had a cup of soup and then you had, say, a salad or a sandwich or your dinner or whatever it is, chances are you would stop eating at a certain point where your total calorie intake would be 20% less than if you wouldn't have had the soup. So it seems like you're drinking your calories, but actually it's saving you calories. So if a goal for you is weight loss, then that's something to really consider and to think about, that maybe if you enjoy soup, there's no reason to not put it there. Now, if you don't like soup and you just heard me say that it'll help reduce your total calorie intake and that's how it's going to help you to lose weight, well, that's a different story. We definitely don't want you to be eating foods that you don't like just because it may have a result that could potentially benefit you. There's many ways to weight loss, and there's many ways to do it where you can enjoy your food. So I would never tell you to do that. So there's no reason to fear the calories for sure. Now, it's also a really great way to get your veggies in, especially if you're choosing, a chunky vegetable soup, or if you like creamy based soups, then you could do like pureed veggies. So I just posted on my story on Instagram that I had a carrot and ginger soup, and it looks creamy. It's definitely not clear, but it looks creamy, but really it's just pureed vegetables. So it has that thickness to it, that creaminess to it, without all the added cream and potentially sugar that sometimes gets added into those soups. So that's where, when choosing a soup, it's a great way to make sure especially if you are struggling to get your veggies in, maybe you don't like veggies, maybe you have kids who don't like vegetables. It's a great way to kind of sneak some veggies in there. And it's a great way to obviously then increase your total nutrient intake. Now, things we want to watch out for is, like I was saying, sometimes these soups can be made with a lot of maybe cream to give it that texture of that creaminess. It could be made with full fat, like milk or some sort of dairy, which is totally okay to consume. We just need to be mindful of the amount and what else is kind of in there. And then sometimes, believe it or not, that carrot and ginger soup that I'm talking about, I got it at a supermarket, and I realized in the ingredient list they had put orange juice, and so I actually ended up putting it back, and then I made mine at home. Now, I'm not one to post recipes. I'm working on it, so I don't really use recipes. I could just kind of tell you what I did, but all that to say that sometimes something can appear to be quote-unquote healthy, and then when we read the nutrition facts and we read the ingredient list, we start to find things that are kind of sneaked in there that we wouldn't expect, right? I don't think you would expect to have orange juice in a carrot and ginger soup. So those are definitely things that we want to watch out for. And listen, there's no reason why we can't splash some orange juice if you made it homemade, but where it was listed on the ingredient list. So when things are listed, first, second, third, it was on the top 3 of the ingredients. That means they kind of put a decent amount in there. And so that's not something that I would want to have on a regular basis. Now, occasionally it's fine, but not regularly. So those are certain things that we definitely, want to look for. And then I think the biggest thing that comes to mind when it comes to soup is salt. Sodium, right? So if you are buying a soup that's already homemade, that's already made, if it's not a homemade product, so the one I'm talking about actually that I had gotten from my local supermarket was going to get from my local supermarket is a homemade soup that they make, and because they serve it in a single portion, they actually don't have to put the nutrition facts label on it. Then now I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but that was supposed to be a law that was introduced and made for 2020, but I think once Trump took over office, and I think because of Corona, I can't remember. Basically, it was just it was a law that it's no longer effective. I think it was supposed to be by 2020. All the nutrition fact labels were going to be changed. And then even if you sold something at a supermarket, it would have to, anything in a single portion, you would have to put the nutrition facts label. Anyways, it's not there. So all that to say, we can't always go based off of the nutrition facts label because we don't always have it. But if you do have a nutrition facts label, then one thing to always look for, and I'm pretty sure I described this on other podcasts and other trainings I have on my Instagram about how to read a nutrition facts label, but I'll give you one little tip that I don't want to go on to a completely different lesson. But one tip, if you're new to the podcast or you've never seen my trainings before, then when it comes to the nutrition facts label, when you look next to the fat, the sugar, the sodium, they have the number in grams. Now, I'm talking about people who are in the United States. I know that in different countries, people are weighing things differently. But in the United States, things are measured in grams. You look to the right of the total grams, and then there's a percent daily value. That percent daily value is basically telling you if that product that you're holding in your hands is high or low in whatever nutrient that it is describing. So for example, I know this is a little bit hard to follow when I normally do this lesson when I have a visual aid. But for example, if we're looking at sodium and we go down to the milligrams of sodium and it says 450 milligrams. Now you won't know, maybe you do know that sounds high. Maybe you're like, no, that doesn't sound too bad. you're not sure, the way to tell is when you look to the right of that, there's going to be a percent daily value. Now, I don't remember this off the top of my head, but 450 milligrams is probably like 25% of your total needs. So either way, it's over 20%. So anything that's 20% or more, we know is high in a nutrient. 5% or less is low in a nutrient. And so typically, when we're looking at something like sodium, for something to be considered a low sodium option, the total amount of milligrams of sodium is going to be 140 milligrams or less for it to be considered low sodium. And then basically, when you look to the right of that, you'll see that the percent daily value is around that 5%. Now, what that means is when something is low in sodium, it's per serving. And so typically that might mean that if you are someone who has high blood pressure, then that's going to be a good option for you to choose. However, if you don't have an issue with your blood pressure and you work out a lot and you don't eat a lot of processed foods and a lot of your sodium is pretty low, chances are you don't really need to worry so much about the sodium. But if a lot of your meals that you eat are high in sodium, then obviously taking a look at the sodium in your soup is going to be beneficial to you. So that's where it can be a little tricky with sodium in soup, because depending on your activity level, your total, what you typically eat in a day, and obviously past medical conditions, then having soup with a lot of salt is actually not the worst thing that you can have. So now the other thing, though, I will say, especially for someone who does have high blood pressure, or you are maybe salt sensitive and you are looking at sodium and things, one thing to look out for is that there might be a soup that you go to in the supermarket that says lower sodium. So not low sodium, lower sodium. And all that really means is that it could be lower than its counterpart. So it could be lower than a different brand. It could be lower than its original version. So they could reduce the sodium by like 100 milligrams. It could go from 850 milligrams per cup to 600 milligrams per cup. And it appears to be lower in sodium, and it is, but it's technically not low sodium. So those are definitely things to watch out for. Now, if you're making something at home, then you could buy like the broth. You can get yourself some broth and you can make your own soup, and you could look for a low sodium broth. You can do that. They even have sodium free broth packets as well. Or if you were making it with just water and you got yourself maybe, you had a chicken bone or a ham bone and you wanted to kind of boil that down for a few hours, and then you added your own salt, that's okay. When you add your own salt in like that, as long as you don't go crazy with your handful, that's actually going to bring out the flavor of the dish. So make sure that you do that with also some herbs, because if you don't put any herbs in there, then adding salt is just going to make it taste salty. But if you add some herbs in there and you add some salt, then it's actually going to help to kind of elevate those flavors and those herbs. So that's particularly important when you're kind of making your own soup from home. Now, things to consider. So those are things to look out for. Things to consider. Are you having the soup as a meal, or are you having the soup as part of your meal, right? So if you're having it as part of your meal, then we definitely want to take a deeper look at that sodium content, right? Depending on what you're having it with. So if you're having a high sodium dinner and your soup is high in sodium, then that's going to put you over the edge. Same thing with portions. And if you're having, you're using the plate method, or you're having a nice, well-balanced dinner, and then you also have like 2 to 3 cups of soup, then obviously that's not going to, if weight management is a goal of yours, then that's probably not going to yield the results you're looking for. So having like a cup of soup with your meal, perfect. But having like a huge bowl of soup and your meal may or may not be effective depending on the plan you're following. Now, this is the biggest thing that I see happen as a mistake when it comes to having soup and choosing soup, is someone will choose to have it as a meal. So it'll be a nice bowl. However, it's often just say like tomato soup, which is fine. Tomatoes are delicious. They're great for you. They're amazing. Good, right? But if we go back to what I teach about utilizing things like the plate method and including all food groups and having balanced meals, then is a large bowl of soup, of tomato soup, really a meal? Yeah, I mean, it might be the same calories if you eat enough of it, but like, is it really going to provide you some protein, some healthy fats, it might not be adequate for a meal. Now, if you do it once a night because you're exhausted, I mean, like once in a while because you're exhausted, you don't feel like making anything and you want to open up a bowl of tomato soup, totally fine. But if we really wanted to make that more of a meal, then I would say to choose something like, a tomato with like chicken and rice, right? That can be more soup, or like a more balanced soup. Or if you're vegetarian, doing like tofu veggies and chickpeas or something like that, or if you did like a potato soup with maybe some like ground, with turkey and carrots and zucchini, or kale. That's a good one. Like a kale, turkey, potato soup, something like that. Then you can really talk about it as being a meal. So think about those three food groups. Is there a carb present? Is there a protein present? And is there a healthy fat present? Okay, those are definitely things to consider. And then I'm just going to throw this in there, although I might not have to, but I always feel like just in case, if you have any allergies or sensitivities, then you want to be careful that, the base of the soup, especially if you are gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, and you're really, really sensitive, that some soups, they might be made with a roux, so they add some wheat or starch or gluten in there, which if you don't have a gluten sensitivity, and you don't have a gluten allergy, there's nothing wrong with gluten. But if you do, that is definitely something to consider as well. So I think that's it. The last thing I want to just throw in there is this all about bone broth. So I actually did record a video about this on my Instagram about 2 years ago, but I'll just quickly give you a recap, which is there's a lot of claims that bone broth is good for gut health. There's actually not enough studies, or I don't even think any studies, to be honest, to support that. The difference between bone broth and just like a regular broth is that the bone broth, the bones have been seeped. There has to be an animal bone broth present, so it can't happen with vegetable broth, obviously, because it comes from an animal, but whatever. Anyways, so the bone broth is going to be seeped for almost like a 24-hour period. So the protein content will be a little bit higher in bone broth than regular broth. And the vitamin and mineral content is going to be significantly higher. The only thing is that, believe it or not, minerals are great for us, but in excess, they can be damaging. They can be harmful. That's why vitamins and minerals are we want to eat them, but you could almost argue it's almost like a supplement form when it turns into bone broth. It's been seeped for so long. And so it's fine to have, it's safe to consume, but we definitely don't want to be having it with every meal. I know a lot of people, it has like it's very trendy right now. So you can go a little crazy with it, and I'm strongly advising you not to. If you want to make your soup with some bone broth, or if you want to sip on a cup of bone broth to keep you warm or whatever, that's okay. But we definitely don't want to have it with every meal, and we don't need. It's not like what's that word? It has a health halo on it. So it's not like a superfood. It's not like anything that has. It's like this big reputation. The idea is, eating soup every day or regularly or often or whenever you want to have it, whatever, is beneficial, whether you choose to do regular broth or a bone broth, okay? So that is all about soup. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, tipswithtony@gmail.com, or join that Healthy Lifestyle Support Group on Facebook. And when you join, you can ask your question there. If you're new to the podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button. And if you haven't written a review already, I would greatly appreciate it. It definitely helps other people find the podcast. All right, guys, that is it for me today. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.